Pleasant good morning. Trust all is well with everyone, considering the heat that we're under these days. Try to make this as quick as possible for us. Hopefully, there's something that we'll take away that is going to be some form of encouragement as we continue to go along our days, our weeks, as time progresses. Dwight is not with us this morning as he's gone to share some good news with some other folks this morning. So we continue along the way. As is customary, I tell you that I am your teacher, not your preacher. And so today, as we're going into a conversation this morning, we're going to be looking at the book of Esther initially. I know that your scripture reading was taken from the book of 1 Samuel, but we're going to talk about Esther for a little bit. So, during the course of the week, what I typically do is drive around when I'm on the road in the car, going between dropping the children from school to home or to work, normally listening to my Bible. So, I can't read while I'm driving, so I listen. And so, the phone is playing and I listen as I drive. And so Esther is one that I was listening to this week, and it reminded me of some stories that produced the questions of why. And so while I am recounting and rereading and re-understanding, I'm sharing with you my learnings as we go along, right? So we are in the book of Esther. The chapter is 3. I believe that we're familiar, I think, with the book of Esther. It's a book that people comment on and note that it's one of the strangest biblical books because it does not reference God, His name, anything related to His laws or even prayers, nothing of the sort as it relates to the people of God, Israel. And so while the book in itself does that, there have been a lot of talking points, a lot of lessons that people have produced out of the book, and we want to see if we could pattern and follow after the trend that has been set. So chapter 3, the people are in exile, and so we are now under the rule of, based on which version you're reading of your Bible, you'll see Ahasuerus or you'll see Xerxes. But that's going to be the king that is currently leading the Persian or Medo-Persian or Mede-Persian, however you want to say that. And as he is now taking over from the rule that was previously Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon, we now find that the people, there's a story here about the people of God being referred to as Jew. And so in the story, Esther, who is going to be in relation to this dude called Mordecai, we pick up the story at the beginning of chapter 3, and it reads, so sometime later, King Xerxes or Ahasuerus promoted Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, over all other nobles, making him the most powerful official in the empire. And all the king's officials would bow down before Haman to show respect whenever he passed by. And for so the king had commanded, but Mordecai refused to bow down or show him respect. And then the palace officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, well, why are you disobeying the king's command? And they spoke to him day after day, but still he refused to comply with the order. So they spoke to Haman about this to see if he could tolerate Mordecai's conduct. And since Mordecai had told them he was a Jew. Verse 5 then says, when Haman saw that Mordecai would not bow down or show him respect, he was filled with rage. And he learned of Mordecai's nationality, and so he decided it was not enough to lay hands on Mordecai alone. Instead, he looked for a way to destroy all the Jews throughout the entire empire of Xerxes. So there's this setting of what we're going to talk about. Mordecai, being a Jew, being the people of Jew, not willing to subject or submit or even bow down to the authority that was promoted in front of him, which is Haman. So being a good Jew, obviously, you would realize that we, the Jews, we don't bow down to any other thing or being but God. So it's understandable that Mordecai takes the stance that he takes. And although the book does not reference God, he is in the background operating, as most people would note. The things that we would like to take away from the reading and the use of the text this morning is that while God goes unnamed, he is also unmentioned, and he is also unconsidered in the text. We see that despite that, he continues to weave through the tapestry of time solutions to the problems that man creates. He continues to wield his power and authority over, and then he continues to use, or in other words, what's the correct term I should use? I have three W terms. Work through the agents of change. So in this case, he's going to be using Ahasuerus, he's going to be using the king, he's going to be using Mordecai, and then he's going to be using Haman. And so while God is instructing and working through, where we get our reading from inside of the First Samuel is where everything seems to develop. So the people are going to be saved again by their God, and so the writer seemingly is producing our thought pattern, at least those who are familiar being Jews, is that God continues to provide for his people even in a time where he goes unnamed, unmentioned, and unconsidered. And so the writing is coming from a time or a period post-exile, when they have already gone into exile, but Babylon has already been conquered, and the people are potentially floating between a period of Medo-Persia and now Greece. And so there isn't so much Greek influence because of how scholars have said that the book is written. There isn't much content that suggests that there is any Greek influence. So what we find here is that in the writing of the book, it's in a period of time where the people are between powers, if you would like to call it. And so in the writing, there's a definite intent to be able to show to the people that while in the period of your living, wherever you find yourself, when God goes unnamed, unmentioned, and is unconsidered, that he continues to work. And so we are going to look at it from the story of First Samuel, because while God does continue to work, the simple lesson that we are going to take away this morning is that we sometimes produce a lot of problems for God continuing to weave into humanity the periods of time. So First Samuel is where we're going to go back and then come forward. So First Samuel, chapter 15. I don't know if you picked up in the reading, but inside of Esther, the beginning of chapter 3, you realize that this guy called Haman is referred to as being an Agagite or Agagite. And an Agagite is going to be a descendant of this guy called Agag, who is going to be a descendant of the Amalekites. And so when Saul has some instructions inside of 1 Samuel chapter 15, reading it, and as Jay was reading, I started to smile because Jay was giving you all a mix of English and Hebrew. So he's saying to you all this guy called Saul, which is Hebrew, which is what you know as Saul. So it's like the people probably don't know what Jay's talking about here, but he gave you a double twang this morning, so I started to laugh while he was reading. So Saul, or Saul, inside of the text, is where the story is resonating, revolving around. So God gives some particular instructions. So verse 3 of 1 Samuel chapter 15. Well, we can read it from verse 2. So this is what the Lord of Heaven's army has declared. So I have decided to settle accounts with the nation of Amalek for opposing Israel when they came from Egypt. Are you all familiar with that story? Briefly, I'll go back with you, not going to the text, but just telling you, Exodus chapter 17, you could go read it yourself. One of the first nation that Israel encounters that are seeking to resist them going into the land of Canaan is going to be the Amalekites. So Amalek stands in front of the people as they are now motioning, coming out of Egypt, going towards the land of Canaan. So God is making reference to this through the prophet Samuel, and he's saying that he's going to now settle accounts with the nation of Amalek for opposing Israel when they came from Egypt. Now go and completely destroy the entire Amalekite nation, men, women, children, babies, cattle, sheep, goat, camels, donkeys. So the whole thing, everybody needs to go. So Saul mobilizes, and then he goes, and then in verse 9 of the chapter, we're going to read, Saul and his men spared Agag's life and kept the best of the sheep, goat, cattle, fat, calves, and lambs. It might seem as a simple bit of detail because Saul went ahead to destroy almost everything but left some things. Agag was left as part of whatever Saul was supposed to do, and then based on the resulting circumstances, we now find that God is saying to Saul that I am now going to strip the kingdom away for your inability to be able to listen to what I have been saying. Now, Paul is just repeating the periods of cycles of history as all the other humans have done. So now we find ourselves asking the question, well, who's going to be the next man up? And so Saul finds himself in a position where he doesn't listen to what God wants him to do, having the kingdom stripped away, not realizing that in his simple action there are going to be some cascading events. So Paul, or Saul, while it is he was living, he sought to speak to Samuel as well as to God. As we go later down in the text, he's going to say, well, I sought to do some good things with what I did, because the stuff that I brought back is now going to be used for worship. It seems to be a good intention, right? But God is saying that your responsibility, your only action is to destroy everything. Simple as it might be, simple instructions, we kind of have the same issues sometimes in our own spaces, where we have these simple tasks that God sets before us, but where we find ourselves sometimes in the story where we're living is that God continues to go unnamed, unmentioned. It's sort of, he is nowhere in the vicinity, but while we are making this decision, he continues to work in the background, despite our failing ways as human beings. So Saul, as he made his decision, he does not deal with Agag. And so as we pick up the story inside Esther, now we find that a descendant of the Amalekites, Haman, is now deciding to deal harshly with the people. Why? Because Haman now realizes that he is a Jew. And the Jews are the same ones that dealt harshly with his people and forefathers, the Amalekites. So you see that there is a cascading story of events. So while in the story of Esther, most people will pick up on the fact that God continues to be the one who provides, he is providentially there in care and everything else. My idea of being able to present a lesson to you this morning is that there are going to be details that we need to pay attention to that God has been laying through time. And so as fast as he gives us simple instructions, you might say to yourself, being a very good standing human being, that's okay. It's fine for me to do that. That seems like small thing. That's a term that we use in our language, right? That small thing. God is not going to feel too bad about that. He's not going to hold that to my account. But not realizing that while that might be true, he might not hold that against your account, your actions somehow have cascading events, either for you in your future or for your future generations. So it's always important for us to pay attention to the details. And so as we go into further into appreciating what is happening inside of the story of Esther, Haman, and Mordecai being identified as Jew, being sought to, as he is being asked now, bow down. Inside of Numbers chapter 24, I believe it is verse 7, there's another account that we pay attention to. When you have some time, go read it. What it simply says is that there's a prophetic announcement as Balak is asking Balaam to curse the people of God, and God says to Balaam what you're going to do and what you're going to say. And as part of that saying, he's saying that your king, or there's going to be a king coming out of these people that are now going to be better than the people of, or the king of Agag. And so while that seems as a piece of information that is inconsequential, what that says is that in the story of Mordecai, when it comes onto the scene, there is a king, and the king is a term that is used throughout or proliferating across the book of Esther. You don't find God, you don't find Yahweh, you don't find any other name, Lord. But what you do find inside of the book of Esther is the term king. And so why that becomes important is that is the narrative being shared with you in the text. And so the king stands as the one who is in authority. And so Haman has a decision to make here. Are we going to stand up and listen to the king, Yahweh, or are we going to bow down and listen to the king, that is Ahasuerus, and then his vessel, Haman? That's the decision that Mordecai has to make. Similar decisions that we kind of make in our own space, where we are going to either subject or submit ourselves to the wills of the people that are over us, or are we going to listen to what the God, the king, Yahweh, is doing. So that's the battle that Mordecai now has in his mind. And so being a good Jew, Mordecai submits to the fact that there is only one king. While Ahasuerus stands as being the king over us, there's only going to be one king. And so inside of that story, what you do find is that the Jews, Mordecai goes on, well, let's go back to Esther so we could read it. I don't tell you, so let's go read it. Go back to chapter 3. chapter 3, verse 8 of chapter 3. Esther chapter 3, reading from verse 8, it says, So Haman approached King Xerxes and said, There is a certain race of people, these Jews, that are scattered throughout the provinces of your empire, who themselves are separate from everyone else. Their laws are different from those of any other people, and they refuse to obey the laws of the king. So what the text tells us is that there is definitely some difference between the Jews and everybody else. They have some laws, although not mentioned, they have some laws that are different to what the king, Ahasuerus, has put in place, essentially also what is going to be put in place by Haman. So Haman goes on to produce this letter of sorts that is going to say that the people are now going to be destroyed. He's going to get rid of all of the Jews, similarly to what God is saying that Saul should be doing in 1 Samuel chapter 15. So let's go on to reading. So if it please, verse 9 he says, So if it please the king, issue a decree that they be destroyed, and I will give 10,000 large sacks of silver to the government administrators to be deposited in the royal treasury. King agreed, confirming his decision by removing his signet ring from his finger and giving it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said, The money and the people are both yours to do with as you see fit. Imagine that. The king, Ahasuerus, believes that he has the authority to subject the people of God to whatever he determines is going to be there with him. Imagine that. So the story, the writer is alluding to the fact here that there stands to be only one king in the story. And so while God isn't mentioned at all, the people, the narrative is working itself out for us to be able to appreciate that. So in the culture, wherever you find yourself, where you stand, and God, as in our culture today, where we have diminishing resources or where God's name is being mentioned, where he goes unnamed, unmentioned, and then he is nowhere in the society. That says to us that he is going to continue working in the background, while where you find yourself seems like a very difficult position to be in, God is continuing to work. The story that we're picking up with Saul is that there are some consequences that we go through that we aren't always understanding that have been impacting us based on decisions that we've made prior to. So this story that we find there, Esther, what is good to talk about and talk about the provisions and how God continues to see about his people, it also speaks to the inability of the human to do what God says. And so when God continues to work, we continue to be difficult. As God continues to work, we continue to be difficult. And as we continue to make all of these decisions, God continues to work through the tapestry of time. And so while we find that we use the terms of omniscience and omnipotence and all the omnis, God is responding in each time to the decisions that we are making. So if you are looking for God to have worked something out in your life and you're standing there wondering why it's taking so long, why is Jesus 2,000 plus years saying that I will come back soon and hasn't come back yet? Sometimes it might be related to the things that we are doing that are preventing God to be able to successfully, in short spaces of time, do what he needs to. That might sound strange. That might seem as if you, the people, have a lot of power, and I'm saying to you, yes, you do. Because God says that you have become his children, sons of God. You are the one through whom he is working to be able to orchestrate his work on the face of the earth. So just as in Saul's case, as Saul is commissioned as king, his responsibility is to relay and to do the very same things that God wants him to do. Failure to be able to respond in kind to what God says means now that there is a long conversation that now needs to go on for the people to end up where they're supposed to be based on the decision that one man, Saul, makes. I don't know if you all appreciate and see that there is always going to be power in the decision that you, the person, make. While you think that you're insignificant, while the details might not be important to you, there are some things that you do, some things that you say, something that you think that have significant impact on your life as well as the lives of other people. It's important for you to appreciate the details, subject yourself to the will of God, subject yourself to him, knowing that while he continues to work, if it is you who are not going to be working along with him, then your journey becomes even longer. Your journey becomes even longer, and you're going to find yourself in difficult positions and ask yourself, well, why? And then you have other people who are not believing in God, questioning, why should I now serve this God? Because your life is so difficult. Can you imagine that? Other people, the Goyim or the Gentiles, the people who are not believing in God, are now questioning why I should believe in this God, because I'm looking at you and your life and it's just pain and hell and destruction. And that is a result of the decision that you, your people, have made, that God is just simply being faithful and righteous to. While he is a loving God, he is going to be faithful. And covenant faithfulness, as well as being righteous, means that he is going to be fair across the board. So where wrong is wrong, punishment is the result. And so while the people of Israel go through difficult periods, while you sometimes will go through difficult periods, it's often in response to how you behave as a human, more than it is how God behaves as our God. You all appreciate that? So while we are asking God to be God, we don't want to be good human beings, but we would like God to be God. And so God is saying that for us to be able to appreciate him as God, we need to step up and start being human beings. A basic concept, but one we seem very hard and difficult to be able to do. Just like Saul. All Saul is doing here is not killing one guy and his descendants. All he is doing is that. But in the midst of the story, he finds himself doing some good, which is to provide worship to God. We might find ourselves in the same position. Not listening to one aspect of what God is saying, but trying to compensate through other areas of our lives, saying that we are doing good somehow. But God is saying that that one little detail, if it is you are not going to submit yourself to it, has cascading effects. The journey becomes very long when it is we are not willing to subject ourselves to the simple things that God has said. Think about the Garden of Eden story. It would be so simple for us to be living in a garden today, having all provisions, if only we refuse to listen to the serpent more than we listen to God. So simple, yet so hard. And so while we go through periods of time, we always find these opponents to God that come up throughout the scriptures. And while God has opponents, he continues to work around them through us, the human beings, to produce the desired results for which he had originally intended. We, the humans, have a responsibility. We are co-creators, co-workers, co-rulers in our work where God is fighting against some powers of darkness, as Paul will call it. Some things that I probably think we will go through at some point in our future to understand the full context of our biblical story. Because there is more underlying that is happening that we are appreciating. And while things are happening in the background for us, as in the book of Daniel, as in the days of the kings, there are going to be these powers that have attached themselves to their instruments on the face of the earth. Xerxes is going to be one of them. Nebuchadnezzar is going to be one of them. And their associated idols, which have now in them depositing these gods that exist over the nations. And as these gods exist over the nations and they seek to now destabilize the plan of God, we the people of God, with our own archangel Michael, continue to fight this good battle. But we have to be willing to stand up and fight. To do what God is suggesting to us to do in the simple details. While it might seem insignificant, it's responsible for us to be able to pay attention to them, live as faithful as possible for what God is saying. That seems like a simple ask, right? One that seems simple but so difficult for us to perform. So the basic takeaway for us this morning is that the plans of the human beings are going to be subject to the promises of the unmentioned God. Let me say it again. The plans of the human beings are subject to the promises of the unmentioned God. So in the society that we live in today, as the world continues to go, as God continues to disappear, as his name continues to get less and less used, as he goes unnamed, unmentioned, and as he continues to be unconsidered in our society, let's never forget that he continues to work through the tapestry of time to ensure that things are going to work out in our favor. We just need to stand up and do our part to make this journey as short as possible. Yeah? So please stand with me as we are able to now come sing a song of encouragement.